This is Amy Newsom, and I'm discussing the development of my theoretical orientation. This was a process that was more difficult than I had expected it would be. I had naively hoped I would find a theory that was a perfect match for me, and my development as a counselor would be simply a matter of learning that theory and putting it into practice. Instead, there are pros and cons with virtually every theory. In the end, though, I determined that at this stage in my development, I am most closely aligned with cognitive behavioral therapy, with an interest in applying CBT in family systems. First of all, it's important for me to express my personal values that guide my thinking. It can be summed up in four words: creation, fall, redemption, restoration. I believe man was created in God's image, and as such reflects many of the characteristics of God. We were made for relationship. We have purpose, personality, creativity, intelligence, emotion, and the ability to make choices, all reflections of God. At this stage, man was in perfect harmony with God and others. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed, it says in Genesis. This suggests an intimacy of knowing and being known that is at the heart of what God intends for his children. I see the fall of man as the root of all personal and interpersonal problems. When man and woman disobeyed God's command, they introduced sin and the resulting brokenness into all of creation. We all have been impacted by the fall and have lost the original condition, relationships, and life experience intended for humanity. Because of the fall impacting everything and everyone, man's suffering comes from both internal and external factors. Our physical bodies are weak. Our thinking and feelings are distorted. Our relationships fail. We do the very things we do not want to do. But even in this desperate state, God's grace is evident. In Genesis 3, God provided clothing that covered man's shame. He did this by taking the life of an innocent to provide that covering, which is a beautiful foretaste of what he will provide to fully make right what sin has caused. And that provision comes in the form of redemption, when God places all the guilt and shame of sin on the back of his Son, and the only perfectly righteous man, Jesus, is killed in order to purchase for sinful man what he could not earn for himself: righteousness and reconciliation with God. This redemption is offered freely to all who believe. Finally, the renewal that was started with the cross of Christ will be made complete one day in the future when Jesus returns to establish the new heavens and new earth. At that time, all that has been redeemed will be made new in an instant. This is the great hope of future glory for all who believe in Christ, and it is the longing of every heart. While this is a lot of theological talk, it is impossible for me to think about my approach to counseling without this framework in mind. I believe in the utter depravity of man. No symptoms or problems that a client comes with should surprise me. Everything good in the world has been distorted, and we suffer from it. I believe there is a deep yearning in every heart for relationship, and much of what ails us is our inability to succeed in meeting this desire. Essentially, everything I believe about people and their struggles are rooted in this biblical narrative. However, I must not lose sight of people as image bearers of God. Though broken and distorted by sin, we still bear the mark of God, and one of the hopes of counseling is to redeem and restore that beauty. My belief in common grace is also important to mention. Tim Keller says, "This gift of God's grace to humanity in general demonstrates a desire on God's part to bestow certain blessings on all human beings, believer and non-believer alike. Understanding common grace provides the basis for Christians to cooperate with and learn from non-Christians." This is the basis for my desire to dive into the study of counseling theories and therapies. I can learn and grow through this process and gain insight for the good of my clients, as well as participate with God's work of pushing back the fall and seeking the restoration of all things. Cognitive behavioral therapy is centered on the idea that psychological distress is largely caused by faulty thinking, and a focus on changing thinking will lead to change in behavior and emotion. CBT is attractive to me for various reasons, both because of my personal characteristics and cultural context. As an ENTP on the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the emphasis on thinking and its impact on behavior and effect is a natural one for me. Culturally, Japanese who seek counseling seem to favor a less insight-focused and more directive style of counseling, a common preference among Asian cultures. In 2010, CBT for treatment of mood disorders was included by the National Health System, which is significant because Japan has traditionally had an emphasis on medications alone. I believe CBT is an approach that will be useful to practice in Japan. On the other hand, as a present-focused therapy, it may lack an adequate consideration on past and childhood events for some clients. CBT is criticized for overlooking the importance of emotions and feelings. And as I consider my Asian context, I believe CBT's emphasis on the individual neglects the important and pervasive interpersonal nature of the culture and would need modifications to be effective in Japan. Family systems therapy operates on the principle that individuals exist within a family system, and this exerts great influence on who one is, how one develops and changes, and how one gives and receives support. The greatest strength of this approach is the empowerment of the family through the process of discovering and exploring their internal interactions. The significance of the relationship is acknowledged by the family context being the focus. In Japan, where community and family is deeply important, approaching individuals' needs from within the family context is reassuring. Because family members are invited into the process, any suspicion or fear that they are being overlooked for the sake of the individual is alleviated. On the other hand, in a culture with very little history of counseling or therapy, it would be the rare family who would be open to entering into a counseling experience as a whole. While members of the younger generation increasingly feel a need for intervention and seek help, the older generations in Japan are reluctant to seek help from outsiders. The shame is too difficult for them to overcome. While family systems therapy could have a great impact on the many multi-generational households that exist, this may be an approach that would be difficult to implement broadly at this point in Japan's history of mental health treatment and care. CBT emphasizes techniques that are personalized for individual clients and focus on changing cognitions. I personally find the ABC framework central to REBT practice to be a good starting point for structuring a therapeutic process. By investigating the beliefs about the events that happen, the client is empowered to begin to reshape their thinking, rather than having a fatalistic resignation to the consequences of things that happen. Disputing irrational beliefs, coping techniques, role-playing, doing cognitive homework, psychoeducational techniques, self-discovery, bibliotherapy, and more can be used. Family system therapies use genograms, birth order, and other techniques. CBT techniques can also be tailored to work well within family system therapy. At the beginning of this process, I was convinced that unless a client explores their childhood and past events, therapy would result in shallow solutions at best. Through discussions with my professor, reading, and contemplation, though, I have become much more open to a present-focused form of counseling. I can see that change that takes place in the present can have a natural impact on putting to rest unfinished business of the past. I've also learned that even if my preferences change and evolve later as I gain more experience, that I feel an obligation now to have something to offer even my very first client. So settling on an approach and seeking to master it will allow me to achieve that goal. So far, my research of cognitive behavioral therapy and family systems therapy is inadequate, and I have a long way to go in order to master the theory and techniques. Finally, integrating my Christian worldview into my practice as a counselor is an area in which I hope to continue to grow. I hope to be able to enter into the world of my clients and serve them with humility and care, with the theories and techniques that I use being tools for this purpose alone. Thank you for listening and watching.